I know this is kind of weird for all of us, but I'm going to be trying to teach through the rest of the book using PowerPoint and this video. So we will go ahead and just head right to the next unit. We're not going to take a test over the last unit or anything. We'll head right into the next unit. But I do want to talk this Wednesday in our Google Meet about the last chapter, specifically about the last part that we didn't get to, which was about whether or not we should have revolutions and whether or not the American Revolution was justified. So you can go back and read over that last section if you want, and we'll talk more about that on Wednesday if you're able to jump in with our Google Meet. But we're going to continue with the next unit. So the next unit is Unit 7, which talks about science. So just like every unit we've done for the last little while here, we're going to start off in the first chapter talking about the fact that God has created science as a good thing, and we're going to be talking about how God created science to be. Then in the second chapter of this unit, in chapter 20, we'll be talking about how the fall has affected science and how we can use science in an incorrect way. And then in the final chapter, we'll talk about how to redeem science. So we'll go ahead and start here with chapter 19, this first video will just be over the first section, 19.1. So to start off, the memory verse, Psalm 111, verse 2, the works of the Lord are great, sought out of all them that have pleasure therein. We probably won't be doing memory verses. I'll see if I can figure out a way to do it, but for right now, you won't have to worry about that, though I would encourage you to memorize it just for your own good. So the objectives for this chapter, the first section will be talking about the idea that science is a God-established good and that it's made possible by the three major assumptions. So just like we've talked about with gender, just like we talked about with government, science is a good thing. And really, science is impossible without some assumptions that we're going to be talking about today. The second part of this chapter will talk about the main purposes of science, which are to declare God's glory and also to use the earth in a wise way. And then last, we'll talk about how to structure scientific study according to the norms that we've talked about in previous chapters. So first, in this first section, we'll be critiquing the claim that Christianity is anti-science and that scientism is non-religious. Then we'll be connecting the work of the creation mandate to the work of science to explain why science is a God-established good, summarizing the three major assumptions and explain why they justify why we can actually do science, and then explain how it's not possible to separate the sacred from the secular, like we talked way back in the very beginning with the two-story view. So first of all, your book starts off talking about something called scientism. So scientism is the excessive belief in the power of scientific knowledge and techniques. Now, just like your book mentions, most people would not call themselves scientists, scientism believers, we could say. So you would not normally find someone that says, I believe in scientism. It's more of a label that other people have given them. But scientism is not just a Christian label. Even people that are not Christians have talked about other people as believing in scientism, referring to this belief that basically science can solve all our problems as a religion that is not true. So even though most people that we would consider as adherents to scientism would not consider themselves as adherents to scientism, Christians aren't the only ones that recognize that some people believe this. So the very definition of scientism you can see there has the word belief. So this is not something that is based on knowledge. This is a belief that we can gain all knowledge by simply using science. So I have a quote here by a common idea that people that believe in scientism have. Faith is the great cop-out, the great excuse to evade the need to think and evaluate evidence. So many of these, at the beginning of your chapter, you have the story from Cosmos, the TV show, how they portray this Giordano Bruno as this hero because he was the scientist that went against the Catholic Church and suffered because of that. And they try to make this whole narrative that you have the church against science. And the whole reason you have the Dark Ages, the whole reason that science was not able to expand was because of religion and the belief in God. There's this idea that Dawkins talks about called the God of the Gaps. Basically, what that means is Christians, anytime we don't understand something, we just say, oh, well, God did that, so Christians don't understand lightning. Instead of trying to examine it and figure out why it happens, they just, any gap in their understanding, they say, God did that, and therefore they say that keeps Christians from being good scientists, and Christianity has actually held science down, and in order to succeed scientifically, we need to make sure that Christianity stays in its place and stays out of science. What's the problem with this? Well, the problem with this is when the scientific revolution did come along, it came along, first of all, not in any of the other areas like Greece or China or Native Americans. Those people had a lot of philosophy, they learned a lot of things, but they didn't really establish scientific principles. And one of the main reasons is because they didn't believe the Bible. And they didn't believe that there was a God who was controlling everything. A lot of the Eastern religions believed that there were many gods or that everything was a god, but they did not believe that there was one God who controlled everything and designed everything for his honor and for his glory. So the scientific revolution was actually promoted by people like Isaac Newton, by people like Louis Pasteur, by people who were Christians, and because of their belief in a one true God who designed everything logically, they were able to seek out and, like we read at the very beginning, that memory verse, study the ways of God, knowing that he had designed everything orderly. If it wasn't for that, there would be no reason to study science. So Christianity should actually propel science because science is something that God created humans to do. So science is for humans to do, and that's one of the reasons why that's important. So there is this myth that there is this conflict between science and Christianity, but the truth is that the only truly good reasons to be a scientist are in fact Christian reasons. That doesn't necessarily mean merely using science as a witnessing tool. So Christians don't just believe, well, we need to learn science so we can defend the Bible and show that evolution is wrong. But that's not the only reason we learn science. Science is actually a great way to love our neighbors as ourselves. It tells a story in the book about the guy who worked for a company that designed new carpets, and he was a Christian, and he thought, well, maybe I should be in the ministry because all I'm doing is designing carpets, until he read the mission statement of his company, which was to help people. And that's what science is all about. Science is something that Christians should be doing to be able to help other people. So science is helping us to obey the creation mandate. So Christianity is not a threat to science. It is just the label we give to really doing what God commanded us to do, which is the creation mandate God created us to do. So there are three basic assumptions that Christians have that lead to science. And many times people who deny Christianity and want to keep Christianity out of science actually steal these three assumptions from Christianity, because without these three assumptions that are based in Christian truth and that cannot be found outside of Christian truth, have to be assumed in order for science to work. So Christianity isn't merely compatible with science, it in fact is essential to it. Consider these three assumptions drawn straight from a biblical worldview, without which science is impossible. So the first assumption is that nature is orderly. The first assumption is that nature is predictable, orderly, and governed by laws. Again, there would be no reason for us to believe that this would be true unless we believe that there was a God who designed the universe, and that God was predictable, orderly. We see this in the Bible in Jeremiah 33:25 when God is making a promise to Israel that his promises, his covenants will not be broken with them. He refers to another covenant that he made with nature and the fact that he has promised that nature will be orderly. We see this in God's promise to Noah that the seasons will continue until he returns. So he says in Jeremiah 33:25, "Thus saith the Lord, if my covenant be not with day and night, and if I have not appointed the ordinance of heaven and earth," then he continues, "I will break my promises with you." In other words, he is saying there's no way that I'm going to break my covenant with day and night. That's going to continue, so I'm not going to break my covenant with you. The Christian view of divine order in creation is not uniformitarian. That says that everything continues exactly how it's always been. We do believe that God can enter into his creation and quote unquote break scientific laws by creating matter out of nothing like Jesus did when he fed the 5,000, or by halting the sun in the sky like Joshua did. But we believe that normally God works using scientific laws. In fact, miracles are miracles because they don't normally happen. They are when God shows that he is still involved in his creation and he can change the laws if he wants to, but they are momentary changes and they are not normal happenings. They're happenings to show that he is in control. So God not only acts through miracles, but the Psalm passage there talks about the fact that he actually works even to make the grass grow and to bring rain down. Just the normal events he is. The second major assumption that all scientists have, but that is really illogical apart from the Christian worldview, is that humans are capable. Again, if we are just the product of evolution, that there will be no reason to trust our minds, to trust our senses, to trust our reasoning abilities. But if we were created by God and we reflect him, then we are capable of not just describing the predictable natural order, but creatively describing it. Again, Genesis 1:27 says we're created in God's image. So since we're patterned after the divine mind, God's creation should be understandable and usable by the people made in his image. There shouldn't be any point in studying the result of an accident. If I have a computer, I can study and understand that computer because I know it was designed. If I walk into a tornado, I don't usually study how that tornado destroyed this building, why it put this place here or this place here, because it wasn't designed. So creativity comes from God. It gives them the example in your book about Fleming, the guy who discovered penicillin. Even though he actually discovered it by accident, but he discovered it because of the artistic mind that God had given him that allowed him to see the way that bacteria was being killed by a certain type of algae, and then that brought the design there, drew his mind to creatively come up with a solution to disease through penicillin. The final assumption number 3, after the assumption that nature is orderly, that humans are capable, is that humans have a right to use nature. And this is an assumption that is majorly being challenged today by groups like PETA that say we do not have the right to use animals. So from an evolutionary perspective, really there is no such thing as rights. So everyone just has to come up with their own ideas. But biblically speaking, humans have the right and the responsibility to rearrange nature in order to meet their needs. It's not what gives us the right, but who. God gave us that right. Now, like you guys might remember, we talked about this in chapel a little while ago, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. But that doesn't mean we can just cruelly abuse animals. Proverbs 12:10 talks about how the righteous man treats his animal gently. The Bible does, though, give us the command to kill animals in a humane way, to eat animals, and by extension, therefore, we would also have the right to use those animals to benefit humans through laboratory experiments and so forth. Now, so those are the 3 major assumptions that in order to do science we have to have, but they can only come from a biblical worldview. Now, Recently, some have come up with this idea called the NOMA, which is non-overlapping magisteria. Basically, this is just a two-story view. It says that religion gets morality, science gets the physical world, but both science and religion have to believe that something exists beyond the cosmos, such as an inexplicable deity or an array of principles that cannot be explained. So science, even though they want to separate science from faith, it has to have faith in two senses. Number one, it has to start off with the kind of presuppositions we just talked about. Number two, really science didn't even take off until people accepted those Christian presuppositions, which is why in other countries that didn't accept those presuppositions, science didn't take off as much. So the Bible reveals